I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. Rob, today we're doing a spooky re-recording of a podcast that we did a couple of weeks ago.
Does this make it less spooky because we're re-recording it, or more spooky?
I think it makes it more spooky.
I think you may be right about that. We are not really inspired by Halloween. Halloween is mostly just an excuse to talk about some other stuff we like in between some series we're recording. We're going back to the well. For me and Lee, there's only like a handful of writers in the entire Chinese tradition we both agree are amazing. And one of those writers is, of course, Pu Songling. And if you're going to do Halloween anything, you pretty much have to go to Pu Songling.
Pu Songling is the ghost storyteller to end all ghost storytellers in the Chinese tradition. And keep in mind, ghost stories are one of the things that Chinese fiction emerges out of. Some of the first stories, the zhiguai, which are kind of coming around in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century CE, those are some of the first works of fiction that we can actually point to as a maybe fully developed work of fiction. I think that's still debated, but anyways, ghost stories are kind of a thing in Chinese literature, and they're far too understudied.
I agree, especially Pu Songling, although the entire tradition could benefit from some more study. Now, we've already done a couple of podcasts on Pu Songling.
I think we've done 5. This might be our 6th.
Is it? I don't know. You can hardly do Pu Songling too much, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too much love, what's that mean? It's like...
Every time you sing on the podcast, I feel like you can just watch our Libsyn numbers go down. Like, this podcast logged 4 downloads.
It's not only that I just sang a country music song, it's also that I got it wrong. It's too much fun. What's that mean?
Yeah, those are the only things wrong. Not your actual singing, just the not getting the lyrics right in a genre that people don't like. That's the only thing.
All right, we should save this for the country music podcast that we do.
We have actually contemplated doing a country music crossover. That's for something. That's for some other time. The story we're talking about today is The Magic Sword and the Magic Bag. It's a classic. It's a truly spooky story. Lots of classic Pu Songling setups. I think you and I are going to disagree about a lot of things.
But maybe I should just kind of go over briefly the outline of the story.
Do it.
So a guy named Ning, he is wandering around Zhejiang, and he finds this abandoned temple, which is always...
Let's point out, he is a candidate for the civil service exams. And in Pu Songling, if you have a candidate for the civil service exams, he's wandering around, finds a lone, quiet place to sleep for the night. Every single time, something's about to happen. Absolutely.
And it's generally going to involve a ghost woman or a fox spirit or something. This is true to form. Ning is hanging out in this abandoned temple. He meets a guy who's named Yan Chisha. They become friends. Ning is hanging out. He goes to bed. A woman comes by knocking on his door. Her name is Little Beauty, and she's like, "Oh, do you want to sleep with me? Let's do it." So Ning says no. He turns down Little Beauty's request. Little Beauty's kind of insistent. He threatens to go get his friend in the next room over, Yan, and she goes off. And then the next night, we see another guy comes in, and he actually, the next morning, dies. They find him dead. So something spooky is clearly going on. Little Beauty comes by later, and she's like, "Look, I've never had any guy who's so true to me, who's such a good guy. I just want to let you know that I'm actually this ghost." She sleeps with men in order to get their spirit, essentially, right? Like she puts a hole in their foot, and she allows a demon to come by and suck on their spirit. She's paying off this demon for something we don't really know. Somewhere in this, Ning decides, "Hey, you're a really nice girl. Let me go find your bones and bury them in a proper burial place," because of course she's a wandering ghost. He goes, takes her, buries her, gives her a proper burial, and she follows him home and essentially becomes a supplementary wife. She tries to do stuff around the house. She helps Ning's mother. At first, Ning's mother is really frightened, but then she kind of warms up to this ghost. They don't at first sleep together because Ning is too good for that.
He's too filial and true a husband.
There's a weird line in this story where Ning says, he is thinking about sleeping with her, but he doesn't want to disappoint his mother. It's a totally weird thing, but it makes sense in a Chinese context because the sort of filial behavior between a son and a mother. If she says no, then the good son doesn't do it. Eventually, Ning's wife, who essentially has no role, she never appears in the story. The wife dies, and Ning is able to take Little Beauty as his ghostly wife, and she bears him sons. Ning becomes a candidate. Everybody lives happily ever after.
It's one of the rare Pu Songling stories involving a ghost and a man who's eventually sleeping with her that ends happily for all.
You can look back and at the podcast that we did on the Marm Epstein reading of Shioji, the Journey to the West, and kind of go over our discussion of yin and yang. But essentially, in Chinese thought, women are understood to need male energy or yang. And one of the ways they get that is through sex. And ghosts are actually particularly in need of yang energy. And so ghosts will oftentimes, in Chinese stories, have sex with men, seduce them, and then suck off their male energy. And it oftentimes does health damage and ends up frequently killing men.
Now, what's interesting to me about this story, though, is there is a point at which things, at least in the narrative, change dramatically. Up to the point where she meets Ning, and then afterwards, in order to remain in the world, she has to have access to this yang through what she's doing as a ghost. Then Ning buries her bones. She follows him home, and from that point on, the only thing we are told about her is how she serves the family. When they first get home, in fact, I think the idea is that they're supposed to sleep together, but the parents are clearly freaked out by this. I mean, I can't imagine why. The guy comes home and introduces a ghost, and they're like, they're not supposed to be like, oh, that's cool.
And when he's talking to his mother, he explains specifically, hey, she's a ghost.
But that's cool, right? I love stuff like that in Pu Songling. A perfectly normal household situation that becomes totally bizarre. The ghost, who's so indebted to Ning, says, you know what? That's totally fine. I totally get it. Just let me serve all of you. That's all I'm really here for. I just want to show my gratitude. So she does.
And mostly it's just talking about her cleaning up after her mother-in-law, which is the filial thing that a true daughter-in-law would do. So it's almost like she's performing the ritual aspects of the marriage. It's just the whole sex thing is...
Yeah, sex is out of the picture, and she gets no benefits, quote-unquote, from the relationship. All she does is serve, and she's rewarded at the end. Now, you and I have studied a lot of Hua Ben. The idea of sort of getting what comes to you is something that's played with a lot in pre-modern Chinese fiction.
Karmic cause and effect, like you get what you put into it.
Right. And in this one, what she puts into it is near perfect filiality. She does not even require household status. She doesn't require a son. The only thing she requires is to serve the mother-in-law, which she does. Now, you and I, the last time we recorded this podcast, and we had a sound glitch, that's why we're re-recording it, finished the podcast by disagreeing at kind of this point, because when I read the story, I see her as genuinely changing. Everything that happened before she goes home with Ning is standard ghost story stuff where she's supposed to feed off this yang energy to remain where she is. Afterwards, something about her filial servitude is filling that gap, and that's what I find fascinating about this story.
So your point is that her performing the filial ritual of being a good daughter-in-law, even though they're not doing the deed, that ritual performance actually makes her more human, or it like transforms her sort of from a ghost to a human? Is that right?
That's how I'm reading it, and I find that very strange and interesting.
I apologize, Rob. I am going to agree with you.
You're going to agree with me? The last time you disagreed. We were supposed to have a fiery debate at this point.
I think the last time we were talking past each other, which
were we?
Never happens.
It never happens. I don't even believe this is happening right now.
Sorry, I actually think you're totally right on that. She does kind of transform, I think, by her filial behavior. I'm not sure if you're telling it to me again has just convinced me, or if I was, saying the same thing and we just weren't understanding each other. I'm totally convinced by that. I think you're right. I think she does become a human. I don't think she ever fully becomes human. It talks about how in the story, the story says she will, by serving the mother-in-law, gain street cred in the netherworld. It doesn't use that exact language, but essentially that's what it says.
And to be even more specific, late in the story, after they're married, she says... They brought back this weird magical bag from the monastery or the place where they were staying. The guy's like, well, maybe I shouldn't get rid of it. And she's like, no, it's cool. I've been with you and the family long enough. I don't really need the yang energy thing anymore. I'm good.
And the bag is actually an important point, and I think we did disagree on this point. So the story ends with her hanging out at the home and essentially becoming Ning's wife in all but name. This magic bag was given to Ning by the Taoist at the very beginning of the story. Other guy in the temple who he befriends, he goes, hey, you'll need this because it's going to get you out of some trouble later on. It protects, he doesn't say exactly what it does, but it protects him from ghosts and demons and other things. There's something magical in the bag. At the end of the story, Little Beauty is hanging out and being the good wife in all but name, and the demon who she sucked men's spirits through their foot for, the guy who would come after and kind of like lick up the spirit from their foot, he comes back and he tracks her down and he tries to essentially kill her. But the thing that happens is the bag actually protects them. The demon comes and he can't get past the bag. The bag does some sort of magical thing, and the demon...
This creature comes out of the bag and devours the demon.
So, Rob, I think that what I was saying is that I think this story is a story about prostitution. That you have Little Beauty. Little Beauty is not just a ghost. She's also a metaphor for women who have been forced into sex work. And this is Little Beauty's pimp coming back to find her after she's done all of the right things. She's been a good daughter. She's found a good man to be her husband. Her pimp comes back from the ghostly temple and is like, hey, I'm going to, devour you. I want my prostitute back. It's only through this magic that she's protected. So I think it's kind of that's how I interpret it. I think she is a metaphor for a prostitute. And you disagree with me on that.
No, I can go a distance with that. Our original disagreement was you were saying that she never actually stopped sleeping with men for their young. That the only reason she was able to stay in the family's compound because they made her sleep outside at night because they were too freaked out that she was a ghost. And your reading was that meant she was roaming the countryside, wherever, still sleeping with men in order to remain where she was. And that's where I was like, yeah, I don't think so. I think something is happening with this Confucian order that's fulfilling that gap.
So I think that may be where our disagreement started. It sounds like we mostly agree. I still disagree with you on that point. I think she is still sleeping with men, but she's at this point freelancing. She's gotten away from her ghostly pimp, and she's just doing it to kind of get the spirit that she needs. And essentially by performing the ritual of being the good daughter-in-law, she becomes a human, right? Like, and this is important in the Chinese tradition. The ritual, the performance of ritual is what made you a person. It's what made you a Ren. That sounds weird, but it's not all that weird when you think about how barbaric and subhuman people are perceived as being when they don't perform the correct rituals. Rob, you're in France right now. French people have a reputation, particularly in Paris, of treating Americans very rudely, but I have found that French people to be very welcoming if you just say like a couple of words in French, and they're always the kind of phatic language being like bonjour, just give them something, go through the motions of saying hello in their language, and they will be really nice to you and treat you like you're a person. If you don't do that, they will treat you like you're a non-person. That, I think, happens all the time in a variety of cultures, so it's not just Chinese. To perform those rituals, whether it's saying bonjour when you go in to get your baguette, or whether it's being a good daughter-in-law, that is what makes us human. That is what makes us, not human, but that's what makes us Ren. That's what makes us a person. That's what makes us kind of
civilized
moral,
in a way.
Civilized, moral being, something like that. I think that this story is just saying that by performing that ritual of being a good daughter-in-law, she's going from being a non-person to being a person.
I think that's a good reading. I think it's interesting because the idea of being, the classic, nice academic word, the ontological question of being, has only really been existential and sort of psychological struggle in the modern era. Before that, it was pretty concrete. How do we know you're a part of the group? Well, because you do the following things, right? And that's been true in just about every culture I can think of. What I think I would add to your reading, what I find peculiar about your reading, is you appear to see no ethical problem within the Confucian system of a good filial daughter-in-law leaving the family compound to sleep with other men and then return to the compound. I can't possibly fathom a reading of Confucian ideology where that's okay. Like, you can continue to be a prostitute as long as when you come back here, you act real nice. Particularly because this whole idea of containment in Confucianism is very important. If you're a true filial daughter, you don't leave the family compound and roam around looking for things elsewhere. You remain inside and serve the family there.
So, Rob, I'm glad we got to this point because I completely disagree with you, and I think you're wrong.
Sweet.
Zheng Tiantian is an anthropologist at a small SUNY New York University. I forget which. It's SUNY somewhere.
SUNY somewhere.
One of those SUNYs. So she has a book that I thought was interesting. It's called Red Lights. It's about prostitution in China today. She, I think, did her research in 1999, 2000, so it's maybe 20 years old, but still it has a lot to say on this issue. And a lot of the prostitutes there in her anthropological research actually talk about how they are being good Confucian daughters by working as prostitutes because they're sending their money home to their parents. I don't see this kind of like, oh, she's sleeping with other men and working as a prostitute, therefore she's not kind of being a good Confucian. It's not ideal in the Confucian understanding of what's going on, but there is a way for a woman to be working as a prostitute and yet still be a good Confucian.
So my counter then would be, they say they're being properly Confucian. Just because they say they're being Confucian doesn't mean they actually are. So why do you think they're being Confucian?
If they are thinking of themselves as being good Confucians, then I just kind of take their word at it. I think that, socially their parents are mostly, they understand something's going on. I don't think they know exactly what's happening, but they know that their daughters are performing this ritual of giving the parents money and supporting the parents in old age, which is one of the main tenets of Confucianism. Confucianism doesn't have nearly as much to say about sex as it does about how you're supposed to treat your parents. Like treating your parents right is number one in Confucianism. Yeah, sure, you probably shouldn't be sleeping around, but the main thing in Confucianism, or one of the main things I would say, is taking care of your parents. So if she's still performing, if little Beauty in this story is still performing the role of being a good daughter-in-law, then I think there is a way for her to still be sleeping around, as the story clearly hints she is still sleeping around until, after she and Ning start sleeping together.
So two things. One, the story does not in any way suggest that she's still sleeping around. You're reading into it because you've read some other books and enough Confucian ideology to make it plausible. But the narrative only suggests that she's serving the family, only says she's serving the family.
It says she leaves the compound.
Does she say she leaves the compound or leaves the house where they're sleeping? Because the compound, you remember, is more than just one building. It's not just leaves the house.
She just kind of disappears and goes out of the compound.
Okay. The example you have is an interesting one because it is true that in Confucianism, especially even as Pu Songling talks about it, giving back to the parents, serving the parents is number one. But number two is, if you're a woman, being true to and serving your husband. Now, we keep using this phrase, she's a good filial daughter-in-law. Well, if she is, then she is linked to Ning as a husband, and as we talk about, all but name. So if she's still sleeping around, she's 100% violating that part. So there's no way she's being a good Confucian if she's doing one very well and totally chucking the other out the window.
Yeah, I just disagree with you. I think that this is just a different interpretation. I think we can spin our wheels and discuss this for another hour, but I think we've had a pretty productive discussion.
Yeah, Lee's dodging it because he knows I won. But we'll end it here with me getting the last word. I like this. I like this dynamic
it has to happen.
created.
It has to happen at least once a year, and it's better that it happens around Halloween because it is quite spooky that Rob, you get
scary.
the last word. Before we go, we have an announcement. We are actually have been invited. It's crazy. We've been invited to CSU, California State University, San Bernardino's Modern China Lecture Series. We're super honored, and we're going to be doing this on this Wednesday, October 29th, 10:30 Pacific Time. Check the website, our website, ChineseLiteraturePodcast.com, for the Zoom info. Everybody is invited. Please show up, support us, clap lots. Laszlo Montgomery of the China History Podcast, he's also going to be having a chat with us, and we're really looking forward to this. Dr. Jeremy Murray is going to be, I think, the discussant and leading the discussion. So it's just going to be a ball. If you can make it this coming Wednesday at 10:30, mark your calendars, 10:30 Pacific time. Mark your calendars. We look forward to seeing you there. All right, I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.